This is Matthew Brenner. Today is February 5th, 2017. I thought I'd lead in with a great clip from Donald Trump.
When America's unified, nothing is beyond our reach. I mean that. You hear a lot of talk about how we're becoming a globalized world, but the relationships people value in this country are local. Family, city, state, country, they're local. There is no global anthem, no global currency, no certificate of global citizenship. We pledge allegiance to one flag, and that flag is the American flag.
I really love that speech by Donald Trump. Basically, no one person can serve two masters. His master is the American people, right? That's what I would figure. But now this Iran business, that's really more of an Israeli agenda, going after this so-called nuclear Iran. Now, if you want to hear it, this is what Donald Trump has to say about Israel.
I love Israel and honor and respect the Jewish faith and tradition. And it's important that we have a president who feels the same way. For me, respect and reverence for Judaism is personal. My daughter Ivanka and my son-in-law Jared are raising their children in the Jewish faith, always reminding me the important values and lessons we learn about leadership, resolve, and families in Jewish tradition. My administration will stand side by side with the Jewish people and Israel's leaders to continue strengthening the bridges that connect not only Jewish Americans and Israelis, but also all Americans and Israelis. Together, we will stand up to the enemies like Iran, bent on destroying Israel and her people. Together, we will make America and Israel safe again.
Okay, here's my disclaimer. Under the First Amendment, I reserve the right to criticize a foreign government's policy as opposed to the ethnicity of a given people, especially when that particular policy could lead the U.S. directly into World War III. Listen, I'm sure you guys have listened to the alt-right and the Richard Spencers and the David Dukes, and you've heard all this stuff about anti-Zionism and the Jewish problem. I have no issue with Israeli citizens and Jewish people. I am questioning the government of Israel. Let's face it, our destruction and mayhem in the Middle East, besides shackling a lot of these countries to the US dollar Federal Reserve note, it's also been about supporting our ally, Israel. Now, we just got out of this conflict in Syria. Do we really want to trade it in for Iran? Let's jump back to a clip from 2013 from Press TV when Chuck Hagel was Secretary of Defense.
The United States has once again supported Israel's warmongering rhetoric against Iran. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel has emphasized Washington's willingness to let Israel decide whether and when it might strike Iranian soil. Hagel said on his first visit to Israel that Washington and Tel Aviv sense, quote, exactly the same threat from Iran. The Pentagon chief made no mention of the possibility that an Israeli attack would draw the U.S. into the conflict and lead to a wider regional war. Hagel is expected to announce a multi-billion-dollar arms deal with Tel Aviv during his trip. Israel, which is believed to be the sole possessor of nuclear weapons in the Middle East, accuses Iran of having a military nuclear program. Tehran denies the claim, saying that the program is aimed solely at peaceful civilian purposes. Leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has said in response to anti-Iran threats by Israel and the United States that Tehran would raze the Israeli cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv to the ground if attacked. Ralph Schoenman, author of A Hidden History of Zionism, joins us now from Berkeley. Mr. Schoenman, welcome to the program. Taking into account Chuck Hagel's comments, would you think that the United States is slowly edging closer towards giving the Israelis their full blessings in case they decide to launch an attack on Iran?
The relationship between the United States and Israel is such that this constant dialogue between them, presumptively about nuances of differences about the preparations to attack Iran, are what we call hard cop, soft cop. It's strictly posturing. They have the identical policy and the identical intent. As you indicated, the ABC News emphasized the fact that Defense Secretary Hagel stressed Washington's, quote, willingness to let Israel decide whether and when it will strike Tehran. And it stated, he amplified this and said that the United States and Israel see, quote, exactly the same threat from Iran, which he described as a toxic combination of nuclear ambition and support for terrorism. And he stressed that Israel, quote, has the sovereign right to decide when and whether and how to attack Iran. And he refused to in any way rule out the United States' direct support for Israel in this attack, which is being promoted and presented as one that will be taken unilaterally in the first stage by Israel. I'd like to add that the Jerusalem Post is emphasizing that the defense minister, Moshe Ya'alon, has been advancing the same thesis, talking about, quote, striking the Iranian nuclear program on its own. He says the IDF can attack Iranian nuclear sites on its own, and so did the head of the Israeli Defense Forces, Gantz, repeat this same threat. So you have here the combination of Hagel making this declaration on behalf of the United States, and quickly amplified by Ya'alon and Gantz to make clear that the Israeli military forces are preparing just exactly that. And the statement was made only by placing the Iranian regime before the dilemma of risking its survival. Is there any possibility that they will back down and their project be stopped? And he added that, Ya'alon, the war of independence, by which it means the war to drive the Palestinian people out of their country in 1947 and 48, has not ended. We continue to face in coming years the immediate challenge to our survival, which he translates into the necessity to attack Iran. So we should be very clear about this. They constantly, rhetorically, diplomatically, in their official speeches, are emphasizing that they reserve the right to attack Iran when and how they choose. And they emphasize that the day is drawing near. One can only look upon this warmongering as a threat to the peoples of the world, and we have to take it at face value.
Author of Hidden History of Zionism from Berkeley, Mr. Ralph Schoenman, thank you very much indeed, sir.
So, fast forward to today. We're supposedly cleaning up the problem of ISIS in the Middle East. Now, mind you, ISIS are funded by the Wahhabists of Saudi Arabia. They are Sunnis. But now, America and Israel are supposed to go after the Iranians, which are Shia, an entirely different group of people. You should take note of that. So what does the mainstream media, more specifically Fox News, have to say about Donald Trump and Iran?
They're not behaving.
Today's sanctions really represent a very, very strong stand against the actions that Iran has been taking. I would never rule anything off the table.
This is truly reckless because this is a country that could start World War III.
I don't want a war with Iran, but they deserve to be sanctioned.
This is dicey, what he's doing, and I think he has to understand that words of a president, or for that matter, the tweets of a president, actually carry a lot of weight.
That's an important step. We've seen that done in the past, and where you have new players, you need to crack down on it.
Iran sanctions put in place by President Trump and the Trump administration. This as a U.S. Navy destroyer makes a move into the Red Sea. The USS Cole, a lot of people remember that name from the destroyer that came under attack off the coast of Yemen. This comes after a number of provocations by Iran, 16 actually, since signing the UN nuclear agreement in July 2015. At least 5 ballistic missile tests, 4 under President Obama, 1 under President Trump, 1 what's called highly provocative rocket test, 7 incidents of harassment with the U.S. military in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, and those, of course, those fast boats confronting U.S. Navy vessels. Let's start here on foreign policy with the Trump administration and bring in our panel from Washington tonight. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard, Lisa Booth, columnist with the Washington Examiner, and Tim Farley, host and managing editor of Morning Briefing POTUS on Sirius XM Radio. Okay, Steve, this action by the administration, obviously these had been planned as an option under the Obama administration, but deployed under the Trump administration.
Well, and thank goodness. This is such a long time overdue. If you think back about the way that Iran has behaved over the past decade, whether you're talking about deliberately targeting and killing U.S. personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan, whether you're talking about funding a variety of terrorist groups, whether you're talking about providing what Osama bin Laden himself called the main artery for al-Qaeda, whether you're talking about providing support for Palestinian terrorist groups, the provocations that you mentioned, any of a number of reasons that we can point to over the past decade that has allowed Iran to establish itself as the foremost state sponsor of terror in the world, means that these actions are wildly overdue. When was the last time that you heard anybody stand at the White House podium, as General Flynn did the other day, and suggest that what Iran was doing was wrong? We just haven't heard that for 8 years, and it's long overdue. I'm glad that we had this kind of forceful statement. I think the Trump administration is exactly right to do this. And what's so shocking to me is that you would have objections from Democrats like Chris Murphy. I mean, it's hard to imagine having anybody have a problem with scolding the Iranian regime, given what we've seen the regime do in its hostility toward the United States over the past decade, really longer.
You know, Lisa, if you don't think that the monitoring Twitter is important. Today, we read a lot of tweets because the president tweets. Today, there was international tweeting going on. President Trump tweeting, Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them, not me. 20 minutes later, the Iran foreign minister tweets, Iran unmoved by threats as we derive security from our people. We'll never initiate war, but we can only rely on our own means of defense. And then we will never use our weapons against anyone except in self-defense. Let us see if any of those who complain can make the same statement. Pretty interesting back and forth.
Yeah, it is. And look, President Trump is in the infancy of his administration, so I think it's important for him to set the tone, particularly in regards to Iran. And look, anyone who thought that this theory that somehow Iran was going to temper their behavior because of the Iran deal has been completely dispelled by the provocations we've seen, as you spelled out earlier in the show, just this most recent testing of a ballistic missile, and not to mention the fact that just 2 weeks after implementation day of the deal, we saw the Iranians put our sailors on their knees and shoot it for propaganda purposes. And how did the United States respond to that? We responded by a $1.7 billion ransom, purchasing heavy water, having the Obama administration encouraging businesses to re-engage in the Iranian marketplace. So yeah, this is a big, strong message that the Trump administration is sending. And as Steve pointed out earlier, I think it's one that is welcomed and needed.
Yeah, Tim, you know, the Democrats have said that they are going to fight and resist on a number of fronts. Take a listen to, and you heard Steve mention Senator Murphy. Here's also Senator Warner reacting to foreign policy Trump style.
I'm not sure what he means by putting Iran on notice. Is this similar to the Obama red line in Syria? I don't know what that means, and none of us up here on the Hill have gotten any kind of assessment from the administration of putting them on notice.
For somebody that advertised himself as being a strong president on foreign policy, let's just look at the context here. Nobody's afraid of this guy. The Russians literally, within hours of the phone call between Putin and Trump, started advancing on eastern Ukraine.
I mean, there's two different messages there. He's either too ominous and too forceful, or they don't know what it is, and it's like Obama's red line.
Yeah, exactly. It almost sounds like a couple of Republicans talking about President Obama not dealing with the red line in Syria. I think one thing that came out today, aside from what we heard on Iran, was also General Mattis and what he said about North Korea. And then we heard Nikki Haley, the ambassador to the United Nations this week, saying the United States was going to be very strong in its dealing and was going to support Ukraine. I think the point here is not so much about what Mr. Trump is saying, because he has typically in the past said that he doesn't want to show his hand. He's sort of showing his hand, but maybe not, because you don't know exactly what he's going to do. But obviously he has set down a marker. The question is, what are the circumstances under which you will deal with that marker that you've set down, and what are you going to do? And it's not so much what he has said right now, I think, although a lot of people are paying attention to it, the tweets are flying. It's what's going to happen, what kind of action he takes. And now he has set up an expectation, I think, to be tough. He has to make sure that whatever he does afterwards is equally as tough and it matches the rhetoric that he's using.
One major piece of leverage that Middle Eastern countries can use against the United States is to discontinue use of the petrodollar. That is to say, they can no longer sell their oil in the US dollar and they can switch to another currency. Now, Iran is planning to do this in March, and that could really screw things up. Let me just bottom line it for you. Trump's already got stuff going with President Peña Nieto in Mexico. He sent Nikki Haley over to Russia to talk to them about Ukraine. Rex Tillerson spoke up about China. Now he's got this going with Iran. We don't want too many pots bubbling over with too much stuff going on. He needs to slow up. Obviously, I do not have access to intelligence agency files. I don't necessarily know what's going on with the Iranian nuclear program, but I just don't want to see us get sucked into another country's war, specifically Israel's war. They are our ally. I do think that we should support them, but I don't want another Saddam's weapons of mass destruction here. Like, share, comment on this video, subscribe to my channel. This is Matthew Brenner.